The night air was crisp as I crouched behind our battered old Ford Fiesta, double-checking the oil one last time before my shift at the hospital's maintenance department. The apartment above my dad-in-law's auto shop was thin-walled, and through that fragile barrier, I caught Jessica's voice drifting down the stairs. She had her phone pressed tight against her ear, her words slicing through the chilly November evening like a spark jumping a faulty wire. "I just wish he'd disappear from my life," she muttered, her tone sharp, soaked in frustration. My chest tightened. There I was, 7 years married, working my fingers to the bone to keep us afloat, and she felt smothered by my efforts. I froze, oil-streaked fingers clutching the dipstick. The rattle of metal tools hitting the concrete below broke the silence, but she didn't pause. Her voice softened, the kind of quiet whisper I used to crave, the one she'd share her dreams and fears with when we first married. I come home, and there are his boots by the door, his tool belt slung over the kitchen chair, plans for a future I never asked for. When I'm up here alone, I can still hear him down below, always fixing, always fussing. It's suffocating. Each word felt like touching a live wire with wet hands. I'd been pulling 70-hour weeks for the last 3 years. Days crawling through hospital corridors rewiring old equipment, nights fixing emergency generators, weekends on call for breakdowns. Every penny I earned went straight into our joint savings, inching us closer to a proper house, away from this cramped flat above a greasy garage. But to her, I wasn't building a future. I was the reason she couldn't breathe. "He talks about buying a house like it's some grand prize," she laughed, but the sound was empty. Nothing like the warm, melodic laugh we used to share on movie nights, right on that very couch. "Marcus doesn't get it. I need space. Silence. I dream of coming home to nothing but quiet, not his heavy boots stomping around, or conversations about circuits and schedules." That hit me harder than any shock I'd ever taken on the job. Had every excited story I told about fixing a broken panel or upgrading old wiring become another weight on her shoulders? Was my passion for my work just another burden she carried? Then she said a name that stung worse than any insult. David Spencer. Marketing director at the swanky hotel where she worked as a social media coordinator. I knew the type, slick, well-traveled, owner of a loft downtown with those huge floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed brick walls, the kind of place that made our boxy apartment above the garage look like a broom closet. "He gets aesthetics, design, atmosphere," she whispered, voice softening into that dreamy tone she used to reserve for travel plans and weekend getaways. "When he talks about his loft, I can picture myself there. Open spaces, clean lines, no clutter, no never-ending fix-it projects." I stayed crouched behind the Fiesta, back pressed to cold metal, until the call ended 20 minutes later. I heard her footsteps cross the floor above, the fridge door opening and closing, the delicate clink of a wine glass on the counter. Only then did I wipe my hands on my worn work shirt and climb the narrow stairs. The apartment felt smaller now, walls closing in like the wires I'd been rewiring all week. Jessica lounged on the couch, scrolling through Instagram, a glass of chilled white wine balanced on the armrest. The soft glow from the table lamp caught the new honey highlights in her hair, the kind of expensive salon work I never could afford. "You're home early," she said without looking up. "Thought you had that emergency call at St. Mary's." "Cancelled," I replied, hanging my tool belt on the kitchen chair where it had lived for years. The worn leather pouch sagged under the weight of wire strippers and voltage testers, the tools of my trade. "Mrs. Whitman's neighbor figured out her breaker had tripped," I added. She nodded, eyes still glued to her phone, the reflection of perfect homes and exotic vacations flickering in her pupils. For a moment, I just watched her, tracing the small changes that had crept in over the years. When had I become the obstacle she wanted to escape? I moved to the kitchen, heating leftovers while the silence between us hummed like an overloaded fuse. Our conversations had become nothing more than logistics, bills, schedules, housework. I'd blamed the cramped living conditions, hoping things would get better once we owned a place of our own. But that hope was flickering out. The next few days passed like troubleshooting a messy circuit. Jessica hummed while getting ready for work, a sound that once made me smile but now felt like a countdown to her escape. She mentioned a weekend getaway with friends, asked if I could cover the rent while she was gone. Her words sounded normal, but beneath the surface, I heard the static of dissatisfaction, a growing distance. One evening, I was in the bedroom replacing a dodgy outlet that kept sparking. A fire hazard I couldn't ignore. The wiring was ancient, probably installed when the garage was converted. As I worked, I heard her whispering on the phone again. This time, she spoke about a wellness retreat in the Lake District, 10 days of silence, mindfulness, and personal space. There was excitement in her voice, the kind I hadn't heard in months. I need time to find out who I am without you always hovering, she said. I tightened the wire nuts carefully, irony biting. I was literally powering the silence she longed for. By the third day, something inside me shifted. The man who fixed every broken thing, who saved every penny for dreams she no longer shared, was fading. In his place, someone more precise emerged. Someone who understood that sometimes the only fix is to disconnect completely. That Thursday night, she said over dinner, stirring her pasta without much appetite, "I think I need to do the retreat. Just some space to clear my head." I nodded, voice steady but heart heavy. "Whatever you need." She smiled genuinely for the first time in months, squeezing my hand across the table. Later, lying awake in the dark, the walls of our tiny bedroom seemed to close in tighter. At 2:17 a.m., I wasn't dreaming of our future anymore. I was calculating every step to grant her wish, to disappear from her life. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains as I sat at our tiny kitchen table. The divorce papers spread out before me like a blueprint for dismantling a life. The smell of burnt toast lingered. A small disaster I hadn't bothered to fix this time. I'd been fixing everything else for years. Maybe it was time to let some things burn. I called Morrison and Associates Family Law downtown. That sleek glass tower I'd driven past 100 times but never imagined walking into. The lobby gleamed with polished marble, buzzing quietly with the murmurs of people untangling their own stories. The lawyer who met me was sharp, all crisp suits and sharper eyes. She was younger than I expected, early 30s maybe, with an air that said she'd seen heartbreak reduced to paperwork too many times to be fazed. "Mr. Harper," she said, flipping through my completed intake form. "Here to discuss divorce proceedings?" I nodded, trying to keep my hands steady as I rested them on the smooth mahogany conference table that probably cost more than my car. "No contest? Irreconcilable differences." "Yes," I said, voice low. "She can have what she wants." The words tasted bitter but honest. She raised an eyebrow. "You seem resigned. May I ask what prompted this?" I stared out the floor-to-ceiling window behind her, watching the city hustle below like ants scrambling over a picnic blanket. "Sometimes people just need space," I said, thinking of Jessica's whispered phone calls, her longing for silence. The lawyer nodded, pulling out a stack of forms and highlighting the steps ahead. Filing, serving, waiting periods. 6 months minimum unless there was no contest. Then it could be quicker. We went through the assets, the Ford Fiesta, our joint savings, the second-hand furniture we'd collected piece by piece from thrift shops and clearance aisles. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make headlines. She asked about children. 7 years married, no kids. Jessica always had reasons, too small a place, career goals, timing. Now I understood it wasn't timing. It was never going to happen. The meeting felt surreal, like I was troubleshooting a broken circuit, isolating the faulty connections, mapping out what could be saved and what needed cutting loose. As I left the office, the weight of the papers in my hand felt heavier than any toolbox I'd ever carried. Back in the car, I glanced at the folder on the passenger seat, heart pounding like a fuse box about to blow. The next morning, I drove Jessica to the airport. She was a whirlwind of excitement, talking about meditation schedules and digital detox protocols as if she was boarding a rocket to Mars rather than a weekend retreat in the Lake District. Her yoga pants hugged tight, a sleek fitted jacket zipped halfway, hair pulled back into a high ponytail that bounced with youthful energy. She looked like a wellness influencer from one of those glossy magazines she loved to scroll through. 10 days without emails, no social media, no distractions, she said, adjusting her sunglasses. Just me and my thoughts. I smiled weakly, gripping the steering wheel. Sounds like just what you need. She laughed. A light, airy sound that made the car feel simultaneously smaller and emptier. At the drop-off, I lifted her suitcases from the trunk. The airport buzzed with travelers rushing past, their wheels clicking and echoing off the tiled floor. Jessica glanced at her boarding pass one last time, then turned to me. "Don't wait up," she said, that laugh again, but this time with a hint of something I hadn't noticed before. Something distant, almost rehearsed. I kissed her cheek, tasting the expensive moisturizer she'd started using, the kind I joked cost more than my weekly groceries. "Take care of yourself, Jess." She leaned into me briefly, and for a heartbeat, I felt the old current between us, the spark that had once made us unstoppable. Then she stepped back, shouldered her carry-on, and disappeared into the sea of travelers, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I stayed by the observation windows long after the plane lifted off, watching it climb through the morning haze toward the solitude she craved. When I finally turned away, the cold inside the car felt different, like the end of a long circuit breaking, leaving a silence that was both empty and strangely full. The Ford Fiesta felt foreign as I drove away, a tool I was ready to hand over to someone else. 2 hours later, it was sold to a young couple with matching wedding bands, their faces bright with dreams and new beginnings. They ran their hands over the interior like it was a treasure chest, discussing insurance and payment plans with the enthusiasm Jessica and I had once shared. I signed the papers without hesitation, the weight of finality settling like dust in the light. That night, I sat alone in my work truck outside the garage, engine off, windows down. Above me, the apartment lights glowed softly, empty except for the note I'd left on the kitchen counter. Written on my contractor's letterhead, the note was brief and clinical. Asterisk, Jessica, you wished I'd disappear. I'm granting that wish. Asterisk. Divorce papers with your father. The car is sold. Proceeds deposited. The apartment is clean. I hope you find the space you're looking for. Marcus. I considered writing more, explaining, apologizing, pleading, but she'd already made her feelings clear. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken circuit is to cut the power. And so I did. The highway stretched out like a ribbon of gray beneath a pale November sky as I left the city behind, the taillights of the suburbs fading into the rearview mirror. The Ford Fiesta was gone, the last tangible link to the life I'd shared with Jessica. I drove my beat-up pickup toward the mountains, trading the sprawl of concrete and neon for the quiet promise of pine and snow. The cabin I found outside Grand Junction sat on 5 acres of rugged land, perched on a gentle slope with a sweeping view of the valley below. It wasn't much. A weathered 2-bedroom with faded paint, a sagging porch, and windows that looked out over nothing but sky and trees. But it was mine, or soon would be. Inside, the place smelled of dust and old wood, with the faint trace of pine sap lingering in the corners. The wiring was ancient, a spaghetti mess of frayed cables and outdated fuse boxes that made my electrician's skin crawl. The heating was inefficient, and the kitchen looked like it hadn't seen an upgrade since the Reagan administration. But these were problems I could fix. I unpacked my tools slowly, laying them out on the scratched workbench in the basement. Each wrench, tester, and wire stripper was a familiar friend, weighted with years of sweat and satisfaction. Here, I could finally work on things that actually needed fixing without interruptions or complaints. The silence was deafening at first. No creaking floorboards from above, no muffled phone calls, no wine glass clinks. Just the steady hum of the wind through the pines and the occasional tap of a woodpecker on a distant trunk. At night, I'd sit by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting shadows on the cracked plaster walls. I found myself thinking about Jessica, not with anger or bitterness, but with a strange kind of clarity. The woman I'd married 7 years ago was still there somewhere beneath the surface, buried under disappointment and unmet expectations. I started rewiring the kitchen the very next day, replacing old circuits with modern breakers and installing new outlets with GFCI protection. I swapped out fluorescent tubes for bright, energy-efficient LEDs that bathed the room in a clean, cool light. Each improvement felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. On weekends, I tackled the garden the previous owner had started but never tended. I learned about soil composition, planting seasons, and the patience it took to nurture something toward growth instead of just repairing what was broken. The earth was honest that way, no shortcuts, no quick fixes. Sometimes neighbors would stop by. A few scattered families who valued privacy but understood the unspoken rules of mountain life. Quiet help with a barn raising here, borrowed tools there, a friendly nod across the fence. It was community without the suffocation I'd known. Work at the ski resort's new conference center was intense but rewarding. The lighting system was state-of-the-art, with heated floors and smart controls that would have made my city clients' heads spin. I was the quiet guy who showed up early, stayed late, and solved problems others couldn't even locate. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside the frosted windows, I sat in my workshop, the scent of pine and solder filling the air. I glanced at a faded photo of Jessica and me from our early days. Her hair wild and sunlit, laughing at one of my terrible electrician jokes. It was a different world. The silence in the cabin wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility, of choice, of a future I was building one wire at a time. But as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees, a sudden knock at the door shattered the quiet. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not here, not now. When I opened it, a woman stood there, drenched from the falling snow, eyes sharp and calculating. She held a worn envelope, yellowed with age. "I'm looking for Marcus Harper," she said, voice steady but tinged with urgency. I hesitated, heart pounding like a faulty breaker about to trip. The envelope was addressed to me, but the handwriting wasn't familiar. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore a message that chilled me deeper than any winter night. Asterisk, some circuits you think you've cut are still live. Asterisk. The wind howled behind her as she turned and disappeared into the storm. I closed the door slowly, the weight of those words settling over me like a snowdrift. What had I left behind, really? The snow was falling harder by the time I closed the door, each flake dissolving into the dark like tiny, cold secrets. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the yellowed letter under the dim light of the workshop. The paper was brittle, edges curled, and scrawled in hurried, looping handwriting that felt too familiar to be a stranger's. "Marcus," it began, "you think you can just cut the wires and disappear, but some circuits aren't so easy to break. There are connections you don't yet understand, and shadows you haven't faced. You can run, but the current will find you." I stared at the words, heart pounding like a faulty transformer about to explode. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, Jessica's. But how? Why? The woman who had delivered the envelope was gone, vanished into the swirling white beyond the porch light. I stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping through my coat, the silence pressing in like static on a dead line. Inside, the cabin felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of unfinished business. I sat by the fire, the letter burning a hole in my pocket, and tried to piece together what it meant. Had Jessica found me? Or was this some twisted game? The thought gnawed at me like a loose wire sparking behind the walls. I flicked on the radio, but only static answered. No signal in these hills, not even the faintest hum of the outside world. I needed answers. The next morning, I drove into town, the snow crunching under the tires, the pine trees dusted white like powdered sugar. I stopped by the local diner, a greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths, and a menu that hadn't changed since the 70s. The waitress, a stout woman named Karen with a knowing smile, poured me a black coffee and slid over a plate of eggs and bacon. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, setting down the cup. "Trouble in paradise?" I hesitated but decided to test the waters. "Ever hear of a Jessica Collins?" Karen raised an eyebrow, wiping her hands on her apron. "Jessica Collins? Yeah, she used to live out by the old mill road, but that was years ago. Moved away after some trouble. What's she to you?" "Used to know her," I said, sipping the bitter coffee. Karen leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. "People around here say she had a lot on her mind, like she was running from something, or someone." The words hit harder than the first frost. After breakfast, I headed toward the old mill road, a winding dirt track cutting through dense forest, now glazed in ice and snow. The houses were shuttered, windows boarded up or frosted over. The air smelled of pine and decay, a place forgotten by time. At the end of the road, I found an abandoned cabin, its porch sagging, the door hanging on a single hinge. Inside, the dust lay thick like a blanket, spiderwebs glittering in the weak daylight. On a rickety table, I spotted a faded photograph. Jessica, smiling, dressed in a worn leather jacket, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Behind it, scrawled on the wall in charcoal, was a phrase that sent a chill down my spine. Asterisk, you can't hide from the current. Asterisk. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but the screen went black. Dead battery or no signal, I couldn't tell. In the silence, a sudden creak echoed from the floor above. My heart jumped. Hello, I called out, voice steady but laced with tension. No answer. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the narrow stairs, each step groaning beneath my weight. At the top, the beam caught a shadow darting across the far room. I froze. Someone was here, and they'd been waiting. The flashlight's beam sliced through the darkness, trembling slightly in my grip as I scanned the upper room. The air smelled stale, like damp wood and forgotten secrets. My breath came out in shallow puffs, misting in the cold. Who's there? I called, voice firmer this time. No answer. Just the soft creak of floorboards settling, or maybe footsteps retreating. I edged forward, every muscle taut, senses wired like a live circuit ready to trip. Then, a sudden movement near the window caught my eye. A figure slipped behind the threadbare curtains. I lunged, yanking them aside, but the room was empty. Just a cracked mirror reflecting the faint glow of my flashlight. Frustration prickled at the back of my neck. Had I imagined it? I lowered the light and moved to the far corner, where a pile of old boxes lay covered in dust. I knelt and pulled aside a battered leather satchel, its buckle rusted but still intact. Inside, I found scattered papers, handwritten notes, photographs, and a small, worn notebook. Flipping through the pages, I realized they were Jessica's journals. Her handwriting, messy but familiar, chronicled months of confusion, fear, and desperate attempts to untangle a past she couldn't escape. One entry stood out. Asterisk, the more I dig, the deeper the current flows. Dad's secrets, the things he left behind. They're like wires tangled in the dark, shocking me every time I get close. Marcus doesn't know. I'm afraid to lose myself completely. Asterisk. My heart clenched. Jessica had been fighting her own battles. Battles I hadn't seen or maybe had chosen to ignore. Suddenly, a sharp rap at the door startled me, echoing through the empty cabin. I grabbed the satchel and crept toward the entrance. Opening the door revealed a man in his late 40s, rugged and weathered, with eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. Marcus Harper? His voice was rough but steady. That's me, I replied cautiously. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I'm Tom Reynolds. I knew your wife, Jessica. We worked together years ago. I nodded, wary. He pulled out a folded envelope from his coat pocket and handed it over. Jessica asked me to give you this if anything ever happened. I unfolded the letter inside. Typed, unlike the journals. It read, Asterisk Marcus. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back from the retreat. There's more to my story than you know. My father's past isn't just old wounds. It's a live wire tangled in all our lives. Be careful. Trust no one. Asterisk. My hands shook. Did she not come back? I asked. Tom's jaw tightened. No. She disappeared shortly after the retreat ended. The police found her car abandoned miles from the center, but no sign of her. Cold knot twisted in my stomach. Why didn't you tell me this before? Jessica wanted you to know only if it was necessary. It's dangerous, Marcus. People don't want the past uncovered. The wind howled through the cabin's broken windows as Tom looked me in the eye. You need to decide if you're going to follow the current or get swept away by it. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, the shadows deepened, and the mystery I thought I'd left behind was only just beginning. The weight of Tom's words settled over me like the heavy snow pressing against the cabin walls. Jessica gone. Lost somewhere between silence and secrets. And now, her past. Her father's shadows. Dragging me deeper into a maze I thought I'd escaped. I stood there, clutching the letter, heart pounding like a malfunctioning fuse box. What exactly was her father involved in? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Tom sighed, rubbing a weathered hand over his stubbled chin. Old business. Not the kind you hear about in headlines. Smuggling, money laundering, ties that stretched into the city's underbelly. Jessica found out more than she bargained for. That's why the retreat wasn't just about mindfulness. It was a way to disappear, to regroup. A chill ran down my spine. I'd always thought Jessica's dreams of peace and solitude were innocent escapes. Now, they felt like desperate moves on a chessboard I didn't fully understand. Why come to me now? I asked. Tom fixed me with a steady gaze. Because you're the only one she trusted to carry this forward. And because the people she was running from, they're still watching. I looked outside. The snow was falling harder, blurring the edges of the world. The cabin felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. Where do I start? I asked, feeling the old electrician's urge to troubleshoot kick in. Tom handed me a folder stuffed with photos, documents, and notes. Jessica's research into her family's past. Start here. Trace the connections. But be careful. Some wires lead to places you don't want to touch. That night, I spread the files across my workbench, the cabin's single lamp casting long shadows. Among the photos were faded images of men in suits shaking hands, grainy pictures of warehouses, and a map dotted with pins marking locations around the city. One name kept appearing, Donovan Pierce, a man I'd never heard of, but whose reach seemed to stretch into every corner of Jessica's world. I ran my fingers over the papers, feeling the tension coil tighter. Sleep came in fits, haunted by dreams of flickering lights and broken circuits. The next morning, Tom took me to a small cafe tucked between two shuttered storefronts. Over lukewarm coffee, he filled me in. Pierce was a big player in the city's underground. When Jessica started poking around, she threatened to expose him. That retreat was meant to be her hiding place. But someone found her. I swallowed hard. Who? Tom's eyes darkened. That's what you need to find out. Back at the cabin, I sat by the window watching the snow swirl. The quiet was shattered by the sudden buzz of my phone, an unknown number flashing on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Marcus. A voice whispered, cold and low. Stop digging, or you'll end up like her. The line went dead. I slammed the phone down, a surge of adrenaline flooding my veins. This wasn't just about Jessica anymore. It was about survival, and the current was pulling me under faster than I'd ever imagined. The phone's ominous silence echoed in the cabin long after the call ended. My hands trembled slightly as I set it down, the cold weight of that warning settling deep in my gut. Whoever had called knew exactly who I was, and what I was meddling with. No more slipping quietly into the shadows. The past was hunting me now. I spent the next day combing through Jessica's files, tracing the tangled web Donovan Pierce had spun around the city. His name surfaced in every corner, business fronts, charity events, even local politics. A man who wore a smile like a mask and kept his true face hidden beneath layers of power and menace. I pulled out a faded photo that showed Pierce shaking hands with a man who looked eerily familiar. It was Jessica's father. The realization hit like a live wire. Her family's secrets weren't just old ghosts. They were alive, pulsing beneath the surface, dangerous and unpredictable. That night, exhaustion weighed heavy, but sleep was impossible. Instead, I found myself in the workshop, tinkering with a broken lamp. Something simple to control amid the chaos swirling around me. The soft glow of the bulb filled the room, a small beacon in the darkness. But peace was short-lived. A sudden knock at the door jolted me upright. I opened it cautiously, heart pounding. No one was there. Just a small package wrapped in brown paper, sitting on the doorstep like a silent messenger. I brought it inside, my fingers itching with unease. Unwrapping it revealed a USB drive and a note scrawled in familiar handwriting. Asterisk, the truth is buried where the wires cross. Follow the path, Marcus.
EJ.
Asterisk. My pulse quickened. Jessica had left me a trail. Plugging in the drive, my laptop hummed to life, revealing a trove of encrypted files, photos, and videos. One video caught my eye. A shaky recording of Jessica meeting with someone in a dimly lit parking garage. Her voice was steady but tense. I'm done running. It's time to expose Pierce. A shadowy figure replied, You know what that means. Be careful. The screen went black. I leaned back, mind racing. Jessica had been braver than I ever realized. Now it was my turn. The next morning, I drove toward the city, the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. I needed allies, people who could help me navigate this dangerous maze. Tom had mentioned a journalist named Rachel Monroe, someone who had been quietly investigating Pierce for years. I found her at a cramped newsroom downtown, surrounded by stacks of papers and half-empty coffee cups. Her eyes lit up when I showed her the files. This is big, she said, voice low. Pierce has been untouchable for decades. We agreed to work together, me with my practical skills and insider knowledge, her with her sources and determination. As we dug deeper, the pieces began to fit together. Money laundering schemes disguised as charity drives, threats to whistleblowers, a network of silence enforced by fear. But the closer we got, the more dangerous it became. That night, as I locked the cabin door behind me, I caught a glimpse of headlights flashing through the trees. A car slowed near the edge of the property before speeding off into the darkness. Someone was watching, and the current was getting stronger. The days that followed were a blur of whispered meetings, late-night research, and the steady hum of tension that buzzed beneath every conversation. Rachel and I became an unlikely team, her sharp instincts and contacts weaving seamlessly with my methodical approach to untangling the web Donovan Pierce had spun. We pored over bank records, tracing shell companies and offshore accounts, each discovery a flicker of light in the growing darkness. Jessica's files were a roadmap, leading us through a maze of corruption, betrayal, and long-buried secrets that reached far beyond what I'd imagined. One evening, Rachel invited me to her cramped apartment, a cluttered space filled with maps, files pinned to corkboards, and empty coffee mugs. The air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and determination. She wore a fitted black sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail that revealed sharp cheekbones and eyes that didn't miss a thing. As she laid out the latest findings, I couldn't help but notice the contrast to Jessica's polished, salon-highlighted image. Rachel's rough edges felt real, raw, even a little dangerous. There's a warehouse on the east side, Rachel said, pointing to a spot on the map. Pierce's operations run through there. It's where they move the bulk of their shipments. If we want proof, that's where we start. I nodded, feeling a familiar surge of adrenaline, the kind I used to get when crawling through crawl spaces or rewiring faulty circuits. This is where the wires cross, I muttered, echoing Jessica's note. Rachel smiled grimly. Exactly. The plan was risky. Surveillance, gathering evidence, maybe even trying to intercept a shipment. But the stakes were high. One wrong move and this whole operation could blow up in our faces. As night fell, we geared up. Cameras, phones, flashlights. Ready to dive into the heart of the beast. The warehouse loomed in the darkness, a hulking silhouette against the city lights, its chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. We slipped through a broken gate, hearts pounding, every shadow a potential threat. Inside, crates were stacked high, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of chemicals. We moved quietly, capturing photos and videos, piecing together the scale of the operation. Suddenly, a sharp noise, a metal clang, echoed through the cavernous space. We froze. Footsteps approached. Holding my breath, I ducked behind a stack of pallets, Rachel close behind. A figure appeared, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Hey, who's there? A gruff voice demanded. We exchanged a quick glance. No time to run. I stepped forward, voice steady but loud enough to carry. We're just here to see the truth. The man's flashlight swung toward me, eyes narrowing. Before he could react, Rachel raised her camera, the flash illuminating the grim set of his jaw. "Donovan Pierce sends his regards," she said quietly. The man cursed and lunged. The chase was on. We darted between crates, heartbeats pounding like thunder in my ears. Adrenaline surged, but so did the fear. Every shadow, every corner, a new risk. We burst through a side door into the cold night air, lungs burning, feet slipping on the icy pavement. Behind us, shouts and curses faded as we disappeared into the city's tangled streets. Safe for now. But the game had changed. Pierce knew we were coming, and he wasn't going to let us win without a fight. The cold night air hit me like a shock as Rachel and I ducked into the maze of alleyways, our breaths steaming in the darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could short-circuit right then and there. The warehouse behind us was alive with shouts and angry footsteps, but we'd slipped through the cracks. For now. Rachel's face was pale but fierce. "We've got what we need," she said, swiping photos from her camera. Pierce's whole operation laid bare. I nodded, but the weight in my chest told a different story. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Back at her apartment, we worked late into the night, piecing together the evidence, sending encrypted messages to trusted contacts, planning the next move. Every ping of my phone felt like a warning. Someone was watching, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica's voice was echoing in my head, that whispered warning about circuits left live. Days later, I received a letter slipped under the cabin door. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper with a message typed in cold, precise letters. Asterisk, "Stop digging, Marcus, before you bury yourself too deep." Asterisk. The handwriting was too neat to be anyone but Pierce himself. I folded the note, heart heavy but resolve hardening. I wasn't backing down. Then the calls began. Silent, breathless, disappearing before I could answer. One night, I returned to find the cabin ransacked. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered, the workshop a mess. But the most chilling discovery was the broken watch lying on the floor. My father's old watch, a family heirloom I thought lost forever. Someone had been here. Someone knew exactly where to find me. The next morning, Rachel met me with a grim expression. "We need to get this to the public," she said. "Fast." Pierce has eyes everywhere. Together, we arranged a meeting with an investigative news outlet willing to run the story. As the sun set over the mountains, I felt a strange mixture of fear and liberation. The past was catching up, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to face it head-on. That night, as I locked the cabin door, I caught a glimpse of a shadow slipping between the trees. A whisper on the wind. A warning. The current was stronger than ever, and I was standing right in its path. The morning sun spilled over the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the cabin porch as I sat with Rachel. The final pieces of our story laid out in front of us. The evidence was undeniable: photographs, documents, testimonies, all pointing to Donovan Pierce's sprawling empire of corruption and deceit. We had arranged for the exposé to go live that evening, a calculated strike aimed straight at the heart of a man who believed himself untouchable. But as the clock ticked down, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The past had a way of circling back when you least expected it. That afternoon, as I sifted through Jessica's journals one last time, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Asterisk, "Meet me where the wires cross. Midnight. Alone." Asterisk. "No signature. No explanation." I stared at the screen, the words echoing Jessica's cryptic note from months before. Midnight couldn't come fast enough or slow enough. When the hour finally arrived, I drove through winding mountain roads, headlights cutting through the thick fog that had rolled in like a living thing. At the old railway bridge, the place marked in Jessica's notes as the junction of her father's secrets, I parked and waited. The cold bit through my jacket as I scanned the mist-shrouded landscape. Then, footsteps. A figure emerged, a woman with familiar eyes and a guarded smile. Jessica, but not the woman I'd known. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver, and her stance was guarded, almost wary. "Marcus," she said softly. You weren't supposed to find me. I felt a flood of emotions. Relief, confusion, anger. Where have you been? What happened after the retreat? She looked away, voice low. I found truths darker than I imagined. Pierce's reach is deeper, more dangerous. I had to disappear to stay alive. We stood there in the fog, the world reduced to shadows and whispers. I left clues for you, she continued, because I knew you'd come. A rush of memories and regrets surged between us. But beneath it all, a fragile hope flickered. I'm ready to finish this, I said. Jessica met my gaze, a spark of the old fire returning. Together, she agreed. As the fog thickened around us, the railway bridge creaked. A haunting reminder that some circuits, no matter how broken, still carried power. And ours was far from over.